Thank you for joining International Partnership Ministry this evening for our first Digital Missions Conference. May our 3 sessions in the midst of our COVID-19 crisis be an encouragement to you. We're seeking to learn how IPM's church planters around the globe are surviving and serving through our current virus trial. We want you to see how victories over past trials encourage us in our current conflicts. IPM's perspective only spans 38 years of ministry in partnership with God, but He has shown us His glory in ministry. I presently serve as the international representative of the mission. Trials strengthen true partnership with God, with His world that needs salvation, and with others for the cause of ministry. The Lord of the harvest has been doing His work of gathering a people for His name out of our world for 2,000 years. Thank you for being part of that harvest. In spite of the trials of many missionary endeavors throughout the centuries, God is still open for business in our world, saving men and women from their sins. Trials strengthened true partnership for Adoniram Judson as he left for Burma in 1813. He became the first Baptist missionary to leave our shores. It was a time of war, economic problems here in America. Did American believers wonder if they could partner with missionaries at that point in history? When he came to Burma, he had many trials and imprisonments because of the war between Britain and Burma. Partnerships were strengthened, though, through his trials and imprisonment, and prayers went up to God for more personnel to flood the shores of Burma to preach the gospel. Thousands have come to faith in our Lord Jesus Christ during the past 200 years. They who sow in tears will reap in joy. Trials did not stop a future generation of missionaries who were going into the heart of Africa. It was tropical disease that killed hundreds of them along their journeys. David Livingstone led the charge to explore a continent that needed God. Churches and mission partnerships brought the next generation of gospel proclaimers to that vast area of our world. In 1918, the Spanish flu killed over 50 million people. This great worldwide influenza pandemic lasted almost 36 months. It infected about 500 million people, a third of the world's population at that time. But missions continued out into our world of trials as partnerships with churches, missions, and missionaries were strengthened. They didn't stop. Thousands of missionaries even began going with the gospel to China. When the Communist Revolution started in 1949, foreign missions work halted. These trials strengthened the Chinese church to stand on their own because of the example of previous partnerships with gospel preaching evangelists and church planters. Some estimate the Chinese church to be today between 60 to 100 million believers strong. For the past 100 years since World War II, and in spite of the trials and the opposition of our century, God's people have continued to further the gospel to the ends of the earth. God is building His church, His body. No wonder one mission leader said, "We need the whole world to reach the whole world." First of all, trials strengthen true partnerships with God in the area of prayer. You remember Daniel, the 6th chapter, verses 10 and 11. Daniel learned in the trials of his life and in his relationship with God that it is the most important thing to walk with God. He continued praying in those trials. One of our IPM missionaries, Enrique Mejia, in the Dominican Republic, recently wrote me, "I have meditated upon Daniel, his life and ministry before and during this time. I understand that Daniel had one plan. There is no other plan because the crisis arose. He kept on doing what he used to do." Maybe the trials of the past weeks have strengthened your partnership with God in prayer. I know it has mine. One of IPM's missionaries in Northeast India reported that one patient in his area died in the local hospital of the COVID-19. He stated, "What we do is only reading our Bible and praying for God's protection around the world." Interestingly enough, when Charles Spurgeon pastored in London in the 1850s, cholera broke out. He was around 20 years of age, but he learned as a pastor to pray. And through the trials of true partnership in prayer, God did marvelous things in their midst. When someone asked Spurgeon the secret of his success, he replied, "My people pray for me." He canceled all of his out-of-town engagements and gave his time to visiting the sick, eventually becoming sick himself. Yet God answered prayers for healing in the lives of many, including Spurgeon. Trials strengthen true partnerships with God in the area of prayer. But secondly, trials strengthen true partnership with God in his work in the world. Remember, he is the Lord of the harvest. IPM has had its share of trials in launching a missions endeavor that was willing to partner with church planting nationals. The home office needed partnership with stateside churches for staff support. Our national church planters had their share of trials, but were strengthened in the partnership provided by IPM as a mission and the churches and individuals who are willing to partner with them for the cause of Christ. Partnership has encouraged these worldwide missionaries through their trials as they've seen multitudes come to Christ, face the challenge of discipling the nations, build buildings, and advance the projects for schools and ministries in third world countries. The last 28 years with IPM, I've had the privilege of making 52 field visits to see what God is doing around the world. I've made 20 visits to India. Stateside, I've been in over 500 churches, and I can tell you, I have seen firsthand how that trials strengthen true partnership. Last year's ministry reports told of thousands coming to Christ and new churches being established. Thirdly, trials strengthen true partnerships for Paul. His trials and sufferings are listed in several of his letters. May his example be an encouragement to some of you in this present trials of the COVID-19 virus pandemic. Partnership is fellowship, relationships, responsibility, and teamwork. Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than 1, especially they have a good reward for their labor. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So how did Paul invest his time when he was forced to stay at home or be quarantined, locked up, or have house arrest? We see Paul's partnership, first of all, with the Godhead. He put his thoughts and minds upon the God that he knew and served. In Romans 8:26, he says, "Likewise, the Spirit helps our infirmities, for we know not what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit itself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered." All fellowship with the Spirit. Romans 8:31 says, "What shall we say then to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us?" Fellowship with God and then with Christ. In the 8th chapter, verse 34, it is Christ that died, yea, rather that is risen again, who is even at the right hand of God, who also makes intercession for us. And then in Romans 8:35 and 37, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Nay, in all these things. And that's where the application is for us. We are more than conquerors through him that loved us. Daniel stated in Daniel 11:32, "The people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits." I hope that these days have brought you closer to God. And then we see Paul's partnership with others. It's been amazing for us as a mission to see the creativity of our men around the world to get out the gospel during these times. Like many of you, they have used technology to reach others. Many have used their cell phones, WhatsApp, Zoom, GoToMeeting, Facebook, YouTube, and a variety of other platforms. Paul communicated by means of his letters, his love and concern for others. He shared very deeply his feelings toward others, especially in the letters of Thessalonians and the prison epistles. Writers during the colonial period in America, especially the founding fathers, were letter writers, as well as their wives. Some of their correspondence is preserved for our viewing. Sending a text or a tweet may only take a second, but a letter takes thought and time. And Paul was willing to share his communication, his desire for the fellowship of his friends. Like many of us, we miss our church families around the world. His partnerships with others were strengthened through the trials he was going through. Paul then used his letters to communicate spiritual guidance. He came with rebuke, admonishment, exhortation, instruction. These we read in the pastoral epistles in Timothy and Titus. Our trials during these weeks have been avenues for many to sow in many places with others whom we do not normally reach. May God bring in a true harvest. And lastly, we see that Paul's partnership was one of intercessory prayer. As you read Paul's letters that he wrote in this time of house arrest, one is taken back by the depth of his prayers for others. Oh, that we knew how to pray for others the same way. Maybe some of you have read through the book, The Valley of Vision, a collection of prayers by Puritan writers. They knew how to pray. More recently, D.A. Carson has a wonderful book, Praying with Paul, that certainly challenges the shallowness of our praying. In the midst of Paul's many trials, he learned to pray. What a wonderful partnership missionaries have in knowing that others are partnering with them in prayers. And what a blessing for IPM to know that our missionaries in turn are praying for us here in America during these terrible crises. How about you in these days of the COVID-19 pandemic? Have you learned to walk with God more, to talk to God more? Have you allowed God to speak to your heart more in these days through His Word? Thanks for taking time for this challenge. Trials strengthen true partnership. God bless you.